The first sign that Karen Tillman had crossed a line wasn't the sound of a raised voice. It was the metallic slam of steel shutters dropping like a hammer. The shriek of metal rolling shut across the Cedar Key post office entrance fell into a long echo that made the fluorescent lights hum louder. For half a heartbeat, no one moved. Then we all realized we were trapped. About a dozen neighbors, a stack of government mail, and an HOA president who'd finally gone one stunt too far. The air inside smelled like dust, toner, and stale paper. Rows of mail bins filled the counters, each one stamped federal property. The late afternoon light had vanished under the lowered shutter. Beige walls and the ancient tile floor glowed under the flickering bulbs. It felt less like a post office than a locked vault. Postmaster Henderson stood behind the counter, fatigued but unflinching. The man had the posture of someone who'd spent a lifetime enforcing order in quiet public spaces. "Ma'am," he said evenly, one hand still resting near the emergency switch that had sealed us in, the other holding a landline receiver to his ear. "I've asked you 3 times now to step away from the outgoing mail bin. You're interfering with the delivery of the United States mail. That," he paused to emphasize every word, "is a federal offense." In front of him stood Karen Tillman, the self-anointed queen of Foxglove Landing. Her lavender pantsuit matched the bags under her eyes. Her dolly, stacked high with gray postal tubs, sat motionless beside her boots. The expression on her face was no longer smug. It was furious, almost feral. "I am the president of the Foxglove Landing Homeowners Association," she announced, loud enough for every clerk, customer, and security camera to hear. "I have the right to ensure our community's mail is handled correctly. There have been complaints." That part was almost true. There had been complaints, but all of them were about her. For 2 months she'd stalked the neighborhood mail kiosks the way a crow watches shiny objects, labeling deliveries as violations, improper packaging, unapproved courier, unsightly parcel. Flyers she didn't like disappeared. Birthday cards arrived late, sometimes opened, each taped shut with a note reading, "Please observe HOA correspondence guidelines." Nobody had known how to stop her, until today. Beside me, my wife Jane kept her phone raised, the red recording light glowing steady. She was an EMT, trained calm, professional under pressure. She didn't say a thing, just filmed in silence while her watch glinted in the artificial light. Me? I'm Hank Flanders, commercial hardware supplier. I sell locks, hinges, security gates, the simple comfort of things that obey rules. So when Karen Tillman tampered with our mail, I'd started keeping receipts, photos, and witness notes. Today's event would be the final entry in that growing file. Henderson kept talking into the receiver. "Yes, sir," he said. "She's still here. She has several bins of mail in her possession that she refuses to relinquish." Karen kicked the dolly hard enough to rattle its wheels. "This is outrageous!" "I'm protecting community standards. I won't be treated like a criminal." "You are committing a crime, ma'am," Henderson replied calmly. "Postal inspectors are already en route." That did it. The last thin thread of control in her face snapped. She pointed at him with the imperious fury of someone who'd won too many board meeting arguments. "You'll regret this. I know people in the county office." "I'll have your job." Henderson hung up the phone quietly, his composure unshaken. "For everyone's safety," he said to us, "this service window is now closed. Nobody leaves until inspectors arrive." The announcement echoed. You could feel the oxygen thinning. Every sound, the buzz of the lights, the faint click of Jane's recording, grew louder in the silence that followed. Karen turned to the door, then to the mail bins, then back to us. For the first time, I saw fear break through her glassy confidence. She'd spent years bullying neighbors who could walk away. You can't bully the federal government. Jane lowered her phone for a second, meeting my eyes. Her nod was tiny, barely a twitch. "We've got it." I nodded back. "We sure do." Then Mrs. Gable, our elderly neighbor who lived 3 doors down, spoke from near the passport booth. Her hands shook against her purse strap. "My husband's medicine," she said hoarsely. "It was supposed to be delivered today. White cooler. Did anyone see it?" Everyone turned. Her eyes stayed fixed on the bins stacked beside Karen's dolly. Karen gave a dismissive snort. "I'm sure it's fine. Everything will be sorted properly once I review it." "A pancreas doesn't run on your schedule," I said. Jane, already halfway to Mrs. Gable, dropped into her EMT voice. Steady, low, commanding. "Ma'am, what kind of medication?" "Insulin," Mrs. Gable whispered. "The specialty kind. He needs it within the hour." Jane's thumb swiped her phone. 911, medical emergency, diabetic insulin shipment located in postal lockdown, she reported. That single word, insulin, changed the air. The tension that had been about petty authority turned into something far heavier. A countdown clock had started ticking inside all our heads. My eyes dropped to the dolly. Between a box of Pottery Barn catalogs and an Amazon envelope was a small white styrofoam cooler stamped medical supplies. Refrigerate immediately. That's it, Mrs. Gable cried, pointing. Karen's mouth opened, ready to justify, but the words wouldn't come. Even she understood how bad it looked now. Her obsession with control had crossed from nuisance to negligence. Jane crouched beside the cooler but didn't touch it. "We'll wait for inspectors," she said aloud for the camera. "Chain of custody stays intact. Smart move." Everything needed to be by the book. Karen stepped back, her gaze jumping from the cooler to the locked door like a trapped animal calculating exits. For all her bluster about rules and regulations, she'd never faced ones written in federal code. Postmaster Henderson radioed the back office. "Medical emergency confirmed," he said, voice firm but steady. "Keep all items in place for inspection and potential evidence collection." I felt no sympathy, only a cold satisfaction, the kind that comes when order finally clicks into place. Jane had said earlier that morning, half joking, maybe today she'll hang herself with her own rules. I hadn't expected the prophecy to come true this literally. Karen tried one last flare of arrogance. "You people have no idea what you're dealing with." Her words drowned beneath the wail of approaching sirens. The inspectors and paramedics would be here any minute. Jane's recording caught the sound perfectly, the rising crescendo of consequence. For the first time all afternoon, Karen Tillman was silent. The rest of us waited, the whole post office breathing in uneasy rhythm. Henderson adjusted his glasses, watching the sealed front door like a sentry. Mrs. Gable clutched her purse strap, whispering thank yous under her breath. I stood beside my wife, the fluorescent light turning her phone screen pale blue. She was still recording, the lens steady, capturing every second. This was bigger than HOA arguments, bigger than neighborhood politics. It was federal law, medical urgency, and one woman's ego colliding in real time. With the shutter down, the building felt like a submarine below pressure. Karen's bravado had drained away, leaving only panic on her face. Regulations she'd weaponized for years were now aimed squarely back at her. For months she'd claimed her meddling was protection, keeping Foxglove Landing orderly, but staring at that medical cooler. I finally saw the truth. She wasn't protecting anything. She was trying to control everything, and now, the system she'd pretended to serve was about to crush her beneath its own weight. Jane caught my hand briefly, a small squeeze there and gone, steady as her gaze on the camera. We'd gotten the whole thing. The threats, the lies, the evidence stacked neatly in gray bins. The moment when Karen Tillman's empire of petty power finally imploded under the spotlight of real authority. This wasn't about stolen flyers or opened envelopes anymore. This was about a life. Miles past the line. This was reckless endangerment. Henderson's face hardened. He moved from behind the counter, his slow, deliberate pace suddenly charged with urgency. "Mrs. Tillman, give me the cooler now." Karen actually took a step back, putting herself between Henderson and the dolly. It was a purely reflexive, territorial move. "This is evidence of the post office's mishandling of our community's property," she blustered. But her voice was thin. She was losing the plot, spiraling. "It all needs to be processed correctly." "That cooler contains temperature-sensitive medication," Jane said, stepping up next to Henderson. She was in full EMT mode now. "It needs to be refrigerated. A man's health depends on it." Right now she wasn't asking. She was stating a fact. I moved to stand beside Jane. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, a big, quiet guy who installs vault doors for a living. I crossed my arms. It's a simple gesture, but it can say a lot. It can say there is a line, and you are on the wrong side of it, and you are not moving forward. The other people in the post office who had been silent observers started to murmur. The mood had shifted from a weird, uncomfortable spectacle to a genuine crisis. "Give her the medicine," someone said from the back. "What is wrong with you?" said another. Karen looked trapped. Her eyes darted from Henderson's grim face to Jane's steady gaze to my immovable stance. She looked at Mrs. Gable, who was now openly weeping. For a second I thought I saw a crack in her facade, a moment of realization of what she had done. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a sneer of pure defiance. She believed, truly believed, that she was the hero of this story, that her mission to uphold the aesthetic purity of Foxglove Landing justified any and all collateral damage. "This is all being blown out of proportion," she said, her voice rising. "It's just a box. It would have been delivered eventually after I logged it properly. Rules are rules." "Mine," she added, chin up. "Eventually isn't good enough," I said, my voice low and flat. It was the first time I'd spoken. Mr. Gable's pancreas doesn't care about your logbook. The clock is ticking, Karen. Using her first name seemed to rattle her more than anything else. It stripped away the title, the office, the illusion of power she hid behind. She was just Karen, a woman in a room who was holding a man's health hostage over a stack of catalogs. Henderson took another step forward, his hand outstretched. The cooler now, Orthus is going to get much, much worse for you. The tension was a physical thing. You could feel it pressing in on all sides. The fate of a man's health was sitting in a styrofoam box on a dolly, held captive by one woman's staggering ego. The federal laws she was breaking were abstract. But a man needing his insulin was terrifyingly real. And we all knew the postal inspectors were on their way. The question was, what would Karen do before they got there? Would she finally see reason, or would she double down on her own madness? Karen's composure finally shattered. It wasn't a slow crumble. It was an explosion. One moment she was defiant, the next she was a cornered animal. Seeing Henderson, Jane, and me forming a solid wall between her and the exit, and hearing Mrs. Gable's quiet sobs, she must have realized that her usual tactics of bluster and intimidation were useless here. The rules were different. The stakes were higher. Her carefully curated world was collapsing in a locked post office. With a strangled cry of rage and frustration, she did something I don't think anyone expected. She lunged, not for the cooler, not for us, but for the other mail bin on her dolly, the big one marked outgoing. It was her last desperate play. If she could just get her hands on the outgoing mail, maybe she could destroy whatever evidence she thought was in there. Maybe create a diversion. I don't think she even had a clear plan. It was pure, mindless panic. She shoved the dolly forward, using it as a battering ram. Henderson sidestepped it easily. But a young postal clerk, a kid named Leo, who couldn't have been more than 19, was standing near the end of the counter. The dolly slammed into his legs. Karen, in her haste, reached over and gave Leo a hard shove to the chest, sending him stumbling backward against the wall of P.O. boxes. He hit the metal doors with a loud clang, looking stunned and scared. "Assault on a federal employee, Title 18. Step back, ma'am," Henderson said. "Get out of my way," Karen shrieked. That was it. The line had been crossed, erased, and set on fire. Tampering with mail was a federal crime. Interfering with a postal employee was a federal crime. But assaulting a federal employee, that was a whole different level of stupid. That was the kind of thing that gets you a multi-year stay in a place with no HOA rules at all. Jane immediately moved toward Leo. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice switching back to pure EMT professional. "Did you hit your head?" Leo just shook his head, dazed. "I'm fine. She just pushed me." While Jane was checking on the clerk, Karen made her move. She grabbed the outgoing mail bin with both hands and tried to lift it. It was heavy, full of the day's letters and packages from the entire town of Cedar Key. She grunted with the effort, her face contorted. Her plan, if you could call it that, seemed to be to run with the bin, and what? Smash a window, use it as a shield. It was the logic of a toddler having a tantrum. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward and put one hand firmly on the edge of the bin. I didn't grab her. I didn't touch her at all. I just put my hand on the bin, anchoring it with my weight. I'm not a small man. The bin wasn't going anywhere. "Let go, Karen," I said. Each word was a separate, distinct command. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her shrieking. She tugged at the bin, her knuckles white. She was surprisingly strong, fueled by pure adrenaline and entitlement. "This is mine." "It's HOA property!" she yelled, her voice cracking. Mail spilled over the side, scattering across the floor. A birthday card with a cartoon dog on it landed at my feet. A bill from the electric company slid under a counter. It was chaos. A federal felony fire sale. "It's not yours," Henderson said, his voice like ice. He had his phone out now, not to his ear, but with the camera pointed at her. The postmaster was documenting the assault on his employee. The evidence file was getting thicker by the second. Karen let out a final frustrated scream and gave the bin one last heave. It tilted precariously. I held it steady. Our eyes met over the pile of stolen mail. Her face was a mess of fury and wild-eyed panic. My face, I imagine, was completely blank. In a crisis, I tend to get very, very calm. I focus on the mechanics of the situation. Right now, the mechanics were simple. A heavy object, an unstable person, and the need to maintain control until the authorities arrived. And right on cue, we heard it. The faint, distant sound of sirens. They were getting closer fast. The sound seemed to drain all the fight out of her. She let go of the bin. Her shoulders slumped. She looked at the spilled mail on the floor, at the scared clerk, at the weeping woman whose husband's medicine was still in that cooler. She looked at the steel shutter that sealed her in. The reality of her situation finally seemed to land on her, not like a feather, but like an anvil. Jane had her phone back up, recording Karen's face at the moment of defeat. She panned down to the scattered letters on the floor. then over to the insulin cooler. She was building a complete narrative, piece by piece, frame by frame. My wife is a master of documentation. It's one of the million reasons I love her. The sirens were loud now, right outside. A car door slammed, then another. There was a sharp, authoritative knock on the post office's glass door. Henderson walked over and peered through the small window. He turned back to us. "They're here," he announced. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. The next chapter was about to begin, and it was going to be read aloud from a federal courthouse. Henderson unlocked the main glass door, but not the steel shutter. Two people stepped inside. They were not in police uniforms. They wore simple navy blue jackets with bold yellow letters on the back. U.S. Postal Inspection Service. They moved like people who'd done this before. They were a man and a woman, both with the same calm, non-nonsense expression. Their eyes swept the room in one clean pass. The locked-down shutter, the scattered mail, the weeping woman, the pale-faced clerk, Jane's phone, my hand still resting on the mail bin, and Karen Tillman standing frozen in the middle of it all. The mail inspector, a tall man with a square jaw, looked at Henderson. "Postmaster Henderson?" "Yes, sir," Henderson replied, pointing a thumb at Karen. "That's her, Karen Tillman. She attempted to remove these bins of mail from the premises. When I refused, she assaulted my clerk." The female inspector walked over to Leo, the clerk. Her voice was surprisingly gentle. "Son, are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" "I'm okay," Leo mumbled, still looking shaken. Jane stepped forward. "I'm a certified EMT. I've checked him over. No signs of concussion, but he took a hard shove." The inspector nodded at Jane, a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. Then her gaze turned to Karen, and it was all ice. The male inspector walked slowly toward Karen. He didn't rush. He moved like a man who has all the time and all the authority in the world. He stopped a few feet from her. "Ma'am, I'm Postal Inspector Davies. This is Inspector Rohr. Hands behind your back. You were under arrest for mail interference and assault." Karen's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The fight was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a woman in a lavender pantsuit who had made a series of catastrophically bad decisions. She looked small and lost. For a split second, I almost felt a sliver of pity for her. It passed. Pity is for people who make mistakes, not for people who willfully endanger others for their own ego. She didn't comply immediately, just stared at him, her mind clearly unable to process the command. Inspector Davies didn't repeat himself. He simply took another step forward, took her arm gently, but with undeniable force, and turned her around. The sound of the handcuffs was loud in the quiet room. A sharp metallic click-clack. It was the sound of a chapter ending. Davies held up a tiny key tagged 317. "Matches the box number," he said. Jane's phone was still recording, capturing the whole thing. The glint of the steel on Karen's wrists, the stunned expression on her face, the methodical way Inspector Davies patted her down. This was the raw, unedited consequence of her actions. No HOA meeting minutes could soften this. No friendly chat with the local sheriff's deputy could make this go away. These were the feds. They don't do friendly chats. Inspector Rohr addressed the rest of us. "We'll need statements from everyone," she said, crisp and professional. "Then to me, document every piece. Restitution can go per item." She turned back to the room. "But first," her eyes landed on the white cooler. "What's the story with that?" Mrs. Gable, emboldened by the turn of events, spoke up. "That's my husband's insulin. This woman," she said, pointing at Karen, "took it. He needs it urgently." Inspector Rohr's eyes narrowed. She walked over, picked up the cooler, and handed it directly to Mrs. Gable. "Go," she said. "Take care of your husband. We'll contact you later. For your statement." Mrs. Gable clutched the cooler like it was a winning lottery ticket and skirted out the door, which Henderson held open for her. Jane's phone buzzed. "Dose given. He's stable, thank you." With the immediate medical crisis averted, the inspectors turned their attention to the mess. Inspector Davies led a now compliant Karen over to a chair. He began to read her Miranda rights in a calm, even monotone. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words hung in the air. This was real. I looked at Jane. She had a file on her phone labeled KAREN. It was full of Photosoft, the illegal stickers she'd put on mailboxes, scans of her threatening HOA notices, and now several minutes of hide video of her committing multiple federal felonies. We had come here today hoping to get enough evidence to file a complaint. We were walking out with the climax of a federal case. Inspector Rohr knelt and started looking through the mail Karen had been trying to take. She picked up a few letters, looked at the addresses, then looked at a thick bundle of mail hold request forms that had been tucked into a side pocket of the dolly. She frowned, flipping through them. She pulled one out and held it up, She lifted a torn check stub. Pay to Green Meadow Consulting. She bagged it for evidence. Henderson, she said, not looking up. Did you process a mail hold for the entire Foxglove Landing development? Henderson looked confused. No, of course not. That would require a request from every single resident. We've had no such requests. Inspector Rohr stood up holding the form. According to this, you did. It's a Form 876, authorization to hold mail. It's signed by the Foxglove Landing Architectural Review Board, authorizing a full hold on all deliveries to the 300 block. Effective today, she looked over at Karen, whose face had gone from pale to ghost white. The thing is, Rohr continued, her voice dangerously quiet, this form looks real, but it's a forgery. A good one, but a forgery nonetheless, a forged federal document. The list of charges just kept growing. This wasn't just a simple case of mail tampering anymore. This was organized, this was premeditated. And the question that popped into my head was why? Why go to all this trouble? What was in our mail that Karen and her fake board so desperately needed to intercept? The handcuffs were just the beginning. The real story was in that pile of paper, and we were about to follow the trail. The days after the post office showdown were a strange mix of quiet and chaos. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip, but the official investigation went silent. Karen was released on bail under strict orders not to come within 500 FT of any U.S. Postal Service property, which to my quiet amusement included our community mail kiosk. That was a bail rule. The 20 FT kiosk circle comes later from the judge. But Jane and I knew this was far from over. The forged mail hold form was the loose thread, and I am the kind of man who pulls on loose threads. Inspector Rohr had given me her card. I called her. I told her about Jane's video evidence and the months of escalating harassment. She was interested. Very interested. She asked us to come down to their field office. We spent an afternoon in a bland government building giving formal recorded statements. Jane downloaded all her files onto a drive for them. I provided a neatly typed, chronologically ordered list of every incident I had personally witnessed, complete with dates, times, and photographic evidence where available. Inspector Rohr looked at my file, then looked at me. Mr. Flanders, she said with a hint of asmile, you have a gift. I like order, I told her. It was during that meeting that the next piece of the puzzle fell into place. Rohr was looking at the forged mail-hold form again. The signature is for the Architectural Review Board, she mused. But the contact information listed here isn't an address. It's a P.O. box right here in Cedar Key. My mind started clicking. An HOA board wouldn't need a P.O. box. They have a clubhouse, a management office. A secret P.O. box meant secret correspondence. It meant someone was sending them things they didn't want anyone else to see. Can you find out who rented it? I asked. We already did, Davies said, joining the conversation. That was the first thing we checked. It was rented 6 months ago. The name on the application is Arthur Pendleton, treasurer. Jane and I looked at each other. We knew everyone on the HOA board. There was no Arthur Pendleton. The treasurer was a guy named Stan, a retired accountant who was terrified of Karen. The address listed on the application for this Arthur Pendleton is a vacant lot over by the highway, Rohr added. And the payment for the box, a series of money orders, untraceable. So, a fake person with a fake address was running a secret mail ROP for a fake version of our HOA board. The question of how far is too far was getting more complex. This wasn't just a power trip anymore. This was a conspiracy. It was deliberate, planned, and funded. We went home that night with our heads spinning. The scope of this was bigger than we'd imagined. It wasn't just Karen being a neighborhood tyrant. She had a system. She had a goal. We just didn't know what it was yet. That evening, Jane was at the kitchen table using her laptop to cross-reference property records while I was doing what I do best, making a list. I listed what we knew. 1. Karen was intercepting mail. 2. She was using forged federal documents to do it. 3. She had a secret P.O. box under a fake name. 4. She was desperate enough to assault a federal employee to protect her scheme. Hank, look at this, Jane said, her voice tight. She turned her laptop toward me. She had pulled up the county's business registration database. There is no registered entity called the Foxglove Landing Architectural Review Board. It doesn't exist legally. The real one is just a subcommittee of the HOA. It has no power to act on its own. So she created a ghost, I said, a shell organization to give her actions a veneer of legitimacy. It was clever in a slimy, fraudulent way. She could send out violation notices, cash checks, and sign documents, all under the name of this phantom board, keeping it separate from the official HOA books. Then I had an idea. It was a long shot, but my entire career is built on understanding how systems work and where their weaknesses are. The application for the P.O. box. I said they paid with money orders, but they had to fill out the form in the post office. There are cameras in the post office. Jane's eyes lit up and Henderson would have been working. He knows everyone. The next morning, I called Inspector Rohr. I told her my theory. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Flanders," she said slowly, "that's a very good point. We're pulling the security footage from the day right now." 2 hours later, she called back. Her voice was different. It was excited. "You were right. We've got it clear as day. 6 months ago, 2 people walk in to rent the box. Karen Tillman and a man we've identified as Marcus Thorne." I felt a jolt. Marcus Thorne. He wasn't a resident. He wasn't on the board. Marcus Thorne was a developer, a notoriously aggressive one who had been trying for years to buy the 20 acres of protected greenbelt that bordered our neighborhood. The HOA had voted him down unanimously every time. The green belt was why most of us had moved to Foxglove Landing in the first place. Suddenly all the pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The mail holds, the secret P.O. box, the fake board. It wasn't about controlling our lawn ornaments or the color of our front doors. It was about money. It was about land. Karen wasn't just intercepting party invitations. She was trying to intercept legal notices, zoning applications, and ballots related to the green belt sale. She was rigging the game, and Marcus Thorne was bankrolling her. The secret P.O. box was their private communication channel, a place where he could send her instructions, documents, and probably payments, all outside the official channels. We had just uncovered the motive, and it was worth millions. The hook was no longer just in Karen. It was in a much bigger, much more dangerous fish. Finding the connection to Marcus Thorne changed the game. This was no longer just about a rogue HOA president. It was about corporate interests trying to manipulate a community. The developer money trail explained the desperation, the forged documents, the secret P.O. box. It was a classic case of greed. Jane and I felt like we were in way over our heads, but we were also too deep to turn back. We had a duty to our neighbors, to the community we'd chosen to call home. Inspector Rohr and her team were building their federal case against Karen for the postal crimes. But the land deal was a local issue, a matter of contracts and HOA bylaws. The feds could prove she assaulted a clerk, but we needed to prove she was trying to sell our greenbelt out from under us. We needed more than just a name on a P.O. box application. We needed concrete proof of the financial link. We needed to see the money. This is where our neighbor Buddy Joel came in. Buddy Joel is a character. He's retired, spends most of his time gardening, and knows everything about everyone, but in a harmless, gossipy way. He's also a former county records clerk. He knows how the bureaucratic sausage is made. I went over to his house one afternoon with a couple of beers and a simple question. "Buddy," I said after we'd settled on his porch swing, "if a developer wanted to discreetly move money to an HOA president, how would he do it?" Buddy took a long sip of his beer and stared at his prize-winning petunias for a minute. "Well, Hank," he said, "he wouldn't write her a check. That's for amateurs. He'd create a shell company, a consulting firm maybe. Lawn and garden. Logistics, something boring. Then the HOA, or in this case a fake committee, of the HOA would hire that firm for an absurd amount of money for services never rendered. The developer funds the shell company. The shell company pays the HOA, and the HOA president skims it. It's clean. It's legalish on the surface, and it's very hard to trace without an inside source. An inside source. That was the key. The HOA board had 5 members. Karen was the president. 2 others, a couple named the Martins, were her loyal lapdogs who did whatever she said. But the treasurer, Stan, was a different story. And then there was Arthur Williams, the secretary. Arthur was a timid man, a retired librarian who just wanted to keep the peace. He hated conflict. We knew he was terrified of Karen. But we also suspected he had a conscience. He was our weak link. He was our moral crossroads. Jane came up with the plan. It was brilliant. It was simple. It was all about presentation. We couldn't just accuse him. We had to show him we already knew. We had to make him feel like coming clean was his only safe option. We invited Arthur over for coffee. Not at our house, which might feel like an interrogation, but at a neutral coffee shop in the next town over. He was hesitant, but he agreed. He showed up looking nervous, clutching his briefcase like a life raft. We made small talk for a few minutes. The weather, the terrible traffic on the interstate. Then I slid a folder across the table. I said calmly. "We need your help." He opened the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a print out of a still frame from the post office security camera. It showed Karen Tillman and Marcus Thorne standing at the counter filling out the P.O. box application. Arthur stared at it, the color drained from his face. He knew exactly who Marcus Thorne was. "We know about the secret P.O. box," Jane said softly. "We know about the forged mail holds. The postal inspectors know. This is a federal investigation now, Arthur. This isn't about HOA fines anymore. This is about prison time." Arthur's hands were shaking. I didn't know." Hess stammered. "I thought she said it was for sensitive legal correspondence." Did she also say it was for cashing checks from a shell corporation called Green Meadow Consulting? I asked, taking a guess based on Buddy Joel's advice. Arthur's eyes went wide. It was a direct hit. He looked like I had just read his mind. How? How did you know? We know, Arthur, I said, leaning forward. And soon everyone will know. Right now, you have a choice. You can be a witness, or you can be a co-conspirator. Karen is going down. The question is whether she takes the rest of the board with her. He looked from me to Jane. He saw no anger in our faces, just facts. Jane reached across the table and put her hand on his. We know you're a good man, Arthur. We know you got pushed into this, but you have a chance to make it right. Tears welled up in his eyes. He was almost caught in a trap, and we were offering him the key. He was quiet for a long time. We just let him sit with it, we didn't push. Finally, he took a deep breath. She made me record it, he whispered. Record what? Jane asked. The bribe. Thorne didn't want to just give her cash. He wanted leverage. He made her solicit the bribe on a phone call. And he made me sit there and record it on a digital voice recorder. As an insurance policy, he said, in case she got greedy. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small black audio recorder. I was supposed to give it to him, but I was scared. I kept it. My heart was pounding. This was it. This was the smoking gun. A recorded bribe attempt. It was better than a money trail. It was a confession. Arthur pushed the recorder across the table. There's more, he said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. She keeps 2 sets of books, one for the official meetings and one for everything else. The real ledger is on a flash drive in my desk at home. He looked at us, his eyes pleading. If I give this to you, you have to protect me. She'll ruin me. We won't just protect you, Arthur, I said, picking up the recorder. We'll make you a hero. You're the one who's going to save our neighborhood. He seemed to stand a little taller when I said that. He had been at a crossroads and had chosen the right path. He was no longer just a scared man. He was our whistleblower, and he had just handed us the evidence we needed to blow Karen Tillman's entire corrupt enterprise wide open. Getting Arthur Williams to flip was the turning point. He didn't just give us the audio recorder, he gave us everything. That evening, he came to our house looking over his shoulder the whole way and handed Jane a small encrypted flash drive. This is the real ledger, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Every payment from Thorne Shell Company, every falsified invoice for landscaping consultation and architectural review fees, it's all there. Jane and I spent half the night going through the files. It was worse than we'd imagined. Karen had been milking the HOA for 2 years, using the money from Thorne to fund her reign of terror. The exorbitant fines she levied against residents for trivial things. That money went into a slush fund. The special assessments for community improvements that never happened straight into her pocket. The Greenbelt deal was just the grand finale of a long and profitable campaign of corruption. The developer was paying her a consulting fee of $10,000 a month, funneled through the fake board and the secret P.O. box. In exchange, she was systematically suppressing any opposition, intercepting mail from environmental groups, and preparing to use forged proxies to push the land sale through at the next big HOA meeting. The audio file of the bribe was the most damning piece of all. Jane plugged in the recorder and we listened, huddled together in our quiet kitchen. Thorne's voice was smooth, oily. Karen's was eager, greedy. So the final payment of $200,000 will be transferred upon the successful vote, Thorne said. And the board, Karen asked. You handle the board? That's what I'm paying you for, Miss President, he replied with a chuckle. It was brazen. It was arrogant. It was the sound of 2 criminals who thought they were untouchable. We now had an arsenal. We had the video from the post office. We had the testimony of the postal workers. We had the forged documents. We had the secret ledger. And now we had a recording of the bribe itself. We had enough evidence to end this, but it had to be done right. We couldn't just leak it. That would cause chaos, lawsuits, and Karen would spin it as a personal attack. No, this had to be public execution. It had to happen in the one place she felt most powerful. The HOA meeting. The annual meeting was scheduled for the following week. It was the biggest event of the year, the one where the budget was approved and major decisions were made. According to the agenda Karen had sent out before her mail tampering privileges were revoked. Item number 4 was a special presentation on the future of the Fox Glove Landing Greenbelt. This was it. This was where she was going to make her move. We spent the next few days preparing for battle. I called Inspector Rohr and told her what we had. She was ecstatic. The federal case was solid, but this gave the motive and expanded the scope to wire fraud and conspiracy. She arranged for Arthur to give a formal protected statement. In return, he was offered immunity. Meanwhile, Jane was in her element. She became a movie director, editing together all the different pieces of media into a single devastating timeline. She took her footage from the post office. She got the official CCTV footage from Henderson. She even managed to get a copy of the body cam footage from the arresting postal inspector through a formal request. She synced them all up using multiple angles of the same event. She overlaid the audio from the bribe recording onto a picture of Karen and Thorne. She created animated graphics showing the money flowing from Thorne's shell company into the HOA's secret account. It was a masterpiece of digital prosecution. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. More people showed up than I'd ever seen. The air was thick with tension. Word had gotten out about the incident at the post office, but nobody knew the full story. Karen stood at the podium looking polished and confident. If she was nervous, she didn't show it. She had her 2 loyal board members, the Martins, sitting beside her like stone gargoyles. Arthur was there too, sitting at the end of the table, looking pale but resolute. He gave me a small, determined nod. Karen went through the first few agenda items with her usual smug efficiency. Then she got to item 4. And now, she said, beaming at the crowd, we have a very exciting opportunity to discuss the future of our beautiful but underutilized greenbelt. I'd like to introduce a proposal from the Thorne Development Group. That was my cue. I stood up from the back of the room. Point of order, Madame President, I said, my voice ringing out in the suddenly silent room. Karen's smile faltered. This is not the time for questions, Mr. Flanders. This isn't a question, I said, walking toward the front. Jane was right behind me, carrying her laptop. It's a presentation, and I believe it supersedes yours. Before she could stop me, Jane had connected her laptop to the projector. The big screen behind Karen, which was supposed to be showing an artist's rendering of luxury condos, flickered to life. The first image was a crystal-clear photo of the forged mail-hold form. A gasp went through the crowd. Karen's face went white. What is the meaning of this? This is an unsanctioned presentation. The meaning of this, Jane said, her voice steady and clear, is that our HOA has been the victim of a criminal conspiracy, and we have the receipts. Then she hit play. Screen snaps, lobby, CCTV, inspector body cam, Jane's phone, all time-stamped and synced. For the next 15 minutes, the residents of Foxglove Landing sat in stunned silence as the whole story unfolded on the screen. They saw the chaos in the post office from 3 different angles. They saw Karen shoving Leo. They saw the handcuffs being snapped onto her wrists. They heard her voice clear as a bell, negotiating the price for selling their park. They saw the ledger with its fake invoices and huge payments. Jane narrated the whole thing, her voice calm and factual, explaining every piece of evidence. When the video ended with a close-up of the secret P.O. Box application signed by Karen, the room was silent for a beat. Then the dam broke. People started yelling, shouting questions, pointing fingers. The Martins looked like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. Karen just stood there speechless, her face a mask of utter disbelief and humiliation. She had been so sure of her power, so certain of her control that she never imagined that the very people she looked down on could orchestrate her downfall so completely and with such meticulous, documented precision. Her reign was over. The peak of the action wasn't a physical fight. It was the cold, hard, undeniable truth projected 10 FT high for everyone to see. The aftermath of the HOA meeting was swift and brutal. The moment Jane's presentation ended, the 2 loyal board members, the Martins, resigned on the spot, stammering apologies before practically fleeing the building. Karen Tillman stood frozen at the podium for a long moment, then turned and walked out without a word. A crowd of angry homeowners shouting questions at her back. In the space of 15 minutes, the entire power structure of our community had been dismantled. Arthur Williams, looking relieved for the first time in years, was immediately nominated as the interim president. But the real showdown was yet to come. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It was a federal and state criminal case. A few weeks later, Jane and I found ourselves sitting in the gallery of a federal courtroom. It was a formal, imposing room, all dark wood and high ceilings, a world away from our quiet suburban street. Karen was there sitting at the defendant's table next to a high-priced lawyer. She looked smaller in the cavernous room, her usual arrogance replaced by a brittle, defensive posture. Marcus Thorne was at the other table, looking furious that his name had been dragged into this. He thought his money could insulate him from everything. He was wrong. The judge was a no-nonsense woman named Judge Alistister. She had a reputation for being tough, fair, and having very little patience for people who abuse positions of trust. Karen passes us chin high like the rules still owe her rent. We weren't there to testify. Our video and documented evidence were so overwhelming that the case never went to a full trial. Karen and Thorne had both accepted plea bargains to avoid a drawn-out, and even more embarrassing, public spectacle. This was the sentencing hearing. The prosecutor laid out the case in stark, simple terms. He played clips from Jane's video. He showed the forged documents. He played the recording of the bribe. He detailed the complex web of shell companies and secret accounts. He talked about the insulin, about the fear Karen had instilled in the community, and about the fundamental violation of trust. This was not a simple mistake, Your Honor, he concluded. This was a calculated long-term scheme to defraud a community and subvert federal law for personal gain. When it was Karen's lawyer's turn, he tried to paint her as a dedicated, if overzealous, community leader who simply got in over her head. He talked about her volunteer work, her passion for property values. I almost snorted out loud. Her passion was for power and her currency was intimidation. Then the judge spoke. She looked down from her bench, first at Thorne, then at Karen. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the entire room. Mr. Thorne, she said, you are a man of means and influence. You chose to use that influence to corrupt a community leader and attempt to steal public land. Your greed is matched only by your arrogance. She sentenced him to a hefty fine that made him physically flinch, plus 2 years of probation, during which he was barred from any real estate dealings in our county. Then she turned to Karen. Mrs. Tillman, she began, and her voice was laced with a cold disappointment that was far more damning than anger. You were entrusted with the leadership of your community. Your neighbors put their faith in you, and you betrayed that trust in the most profound way possible. You used your power not to build your community, but to plunder it. You were so convinced of your own importance that you believed the rules, and indeed federal laws did not apply to you. Judge Alistaster paused, looking down at her notes. Your actions put a man's life at risk over a box of catalogues. That to me is the most telling detail of all. It shows a breathtaking lack of empathy and a frightening level of narcissism. I glanced at Jane. She squeezed my hand. This was it. This was the moment of reckoning. Therefore, the judge continued, in addition to the federal charges to which you have pled guilty, I am also addressing the matter of restitution to the community you defrauded. She spelled out the terms, and they were beautiful in their precision. First, you will repay every single dollar of the fraudulent funds as detailed in the authentic ledger provided by Mr. Williams. That amount, with interest, comes to $127,450. A gasp came from Karen's side of the room. Second, the judge went on, for the emotional distress and violation of privacy caused by your illegal mail tampering, you will pay restitution to every single household in Foxglove Landing. I am setting the amount at $100 per household per incident of confirmed mail interception, and $250 per tampered item plus 18% annual interest until paid. The court has a list. It will be a substantial sum. The lawyer started tossed up to object, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him. I'm not finished, she said. Finally, given the specific nature of your offenses and the location where your criminal enterprise reached its peak, I am issuing a special restraining order. She looked directly at Karen. For the next 5 years, you are legally forbidden from coming within 20 FT of any United States Postal Service mailbox, mail slot, or community mail kiosk, a 20 FT radius. Is that clear, Mrs. Tillman? A 20th restraining order from a mailbox. It was perfect. It was poetic. It was a sentence tailored so perfectly to the crime that it was almost a work of art. It wasn't just a punishment. It was a permanent physical reminder of her failure. A circle of shame she could never enter. The judge had not only brought the hammer of justice down, she had forged it into a tool of exquisite irony. Karen's quest for ultimate control had ended with her being banished from the one place where her power trip had begun. The end of Astri like this isn't a single moment. It's a series of small, quiet changes. It's the slow healing of a wound. In the months after the sentencing, Foxglove Landing began to breathe again. The fear that had hung over our neighborhood for so long finally lifted. People started talking to each other again. Not in whispered complaints about Karen, but in open conversations on their front lawns. The ugly, threatening HOA violation notices stopped appearing on doors. The most visible sign of change came from Karen herself. As part of her plea deal, she was sentenced to 500 hours of community service. In a move of what I can only call divinely inspired justice, the court assigned her to the Cedar Key post office. Not behind the counter, of course. Her job was to sweep the floors, clean the glass, and sort the recycling in the back room, all under the watchful eye of Postmaster Henderson. A few times when I went to mail a package, I'd see her there dressed in a bright orange vest, her face a permanent mask of grim resignation. She never made eye contact. The queen had been deposed and was now scrubbing the floors of the castle she'd tried to conquer. It was a humbling and very public fall from grace. Under Arthur Williams' interim leadership, the HOA was completely rebuilt from the ground up. The first thing we did was hire an independent forensic accountant to audit every transaction from the past 5 years. The final report was a horror story of embezzlement and fraud. But it also gave us a clean slate. We held new elections, establishing a board with term limits and strict transparency rules. All meetings were to be recorded, and all financial records were posted online for any resident to see. We weren't just removing a corrupt leader. We were building a system that would prevent another one from ever taking root. Jane and I became unlikely heroes. People would stop us on the street to thank us. Mrs. Gable brought over a homemade apple pie, her husband looking healthier than I'd ever seen him. Buddy Joel appointed me the unofficial head of his one-man neighborhood watch, which mostly involved us drinking beer on his porch and making sure no one's recycling bin was overflowing. We didn't want the fame, but it was nice to know that our neighbors felt safe again. We had answered the question of how far is too far, and the answer was clear. You go as far as it takes to protect your home and the people you care about. One of the new rules the HOA passed was a small symbolic one. It stated that the community mail kiosk was a federal zone, a sanctuary. To make the point clear, Arthur, in his first official act as the new president, went out one Saturday morning with a can of bright orange spray paint and a measuring tape. He carefully measured out a 25th radius around the entire kiosk structure and painted a clean, sharp line on the pavement. It was a visual reminder of Karen's restraining order, a circle of exclusion that marked the boundary between our community and her corruption. A few weeks ago, Jane and I were walking our dog, and we stopped to get the mail. I stood there for a moment, looking at that orange chalk line, faded now, but still visible. It was a scar, but it was a scar that told a story of healing. A story of how a quiet, orderly man who likes receipts and his sharp, steady wife decided that enough was enough. How a community pushed to the brink found the courage to fight back. I opened our mailbox number 112 and pulled out the day's letters. A bill, a catalog, a postcard from Jane's sister. Simple, ordinary things. But they felt different now. They felt sacred. I looked at Jane and smiled. The neighborhood was quiet. The mail was safe. Order finally was in its